Hey there, this is Dan and you're watching the Salty Sea. I'm here today to continue on my Warcry's Championship Belt series that I got into last fall and early winter. It's been a while, but I wanted to come back to it to talk about all of the best combos in Warcry. We're looking specifically at abilities that help multiple units synergize with each other. It's one of the most fun things you can do in any war game, is kind of build a machine with your warband. And so I'm really excited to talk about it here today. So as always, I want to talk about the rules for this countdown before I get into it. We're in the 8 points fighting for Archaon, so this is going to be the top 8. Now, I do want to talk about the difference between an ability and a combo, because it is a somewhat blurry line. So any kind of self-contained ability isn't going to make the list. I'll probably attack something like that in the future, but not for this video. So something like the Gloomspite Quad, which always blows people away when they see it. It's an amazing ability, but it's not a combo. It's totally self-contained. Any kind of 1-2 punch, those are the easiest to define and sort of fit this category best. So there are a ton of abilities in the game where one unit can give another unit a bonus attack, and a few others where there's sort of a single target buff, right? So you say, target unit gets extra attacks equal to the dice ability, something like that. Those are going to be heavily populating this list. Bonus attacks tend to deal a little bit more per point or per dice used than the single target buffs do, but not always, as you'll see soon. Then we've also got the area of effect buff and debuffs. So this is like Waagh and things like that. Some of them only buff movement, some of them buff damage. There's a few things that buff both. This is a little bit more complicated as to whether or not it counts. They need to be something that has you playing a game specifically to maximize this ability among multiple units, and then we can talk about whether it counts. So how do I evaluate these? Well, I'm a Johnny at heart, so for personal reasons I evaluate based on what I think is sweet, but for the purposes of this list, I'm going to be looking at efficiency and what the scenarios are. So we're looking at total points cost versus sort of how much bonus damage you're getting because of the combo. So both sort of your percent damage magnification, how much it was doing versus what this ability is giving it, and also just the total damage you're doing divided by the points cost. I won't bog it down too much with math, but I'm more than happy always to answer it in the comments, and I'll also be making use of my damage efficiency and tank score ratings, and I'll put that math hammer down in the comments as well. Then I'm looking at the best and worst case scenarios. So we're looking at sort of the maximum damage you can do versus the maximum number of possible kills that you can put out. Certain combos might do a ton of damage, but you can only ever take down one unit with them. So that changes where you're going to use it. That doesn't necessarily make it bad, certainly does not, but it does change how you use it. Then I'm also looking at whether or not the units are playable on their own. So, for example, if one of them dies, is the other unit completely useless now? That certainly would drop a combo off of the list, since generally the most powerful combos in any strategy game are ones where you still have something functional if it doesn't come together, but if it does, you get to try and blow your opponent off the water. And then speaking of disrupting it, I do want to talk about the ways your opponents can play around it, because if it's an incredible combo, which you'll actually see in our number 7 spot, but it can just be picked apart really easily, well, it's really going to suffer from that. So before I get into the list, I don't mind telling you, I had to do a ton of research for this. 3 dozen or more different unit combos. I kind of went into my math hammer calculations, so I came out with more that I liked than could fit on the list. So one of my favorites is Bloodstoker plus a Korgorath. It's for 435 points. It's a bonus attack ability, and Bloodstokers are sweet because they can help out a ton of different things: Fiend Bloods, Gorehounds, and the Ogroid Thaumaturge, for example, in Tzeentch. But it with the Korgorath has quite a huge damage output, which is pretty nice. Then we've got kind of the classic Warcry combo. This is the very first one that they put into the game. It is really good. The Rocktusk Prowler and the Beast Speaker. It's dragged down and doesn't quite make the list just because the Beast Speaker is not the best unit, but as a bonus attack it's great, and Untamed Beasts with 2 boxes, they're absolutely, a tier 2 competitive warband. And when I say tier 2, that's not an insult. You can absolutely buy 2 boxes of Untamed Beasts and give yourself a real chance of winning any Warcry tournament. I'll even give you the list. It's a Heart Eater, 2 Rocktusk Prowlers, a Beast Speaker, and 6 Plains Runners. That list, it's absolutely worth putting the Beast Speaker in for the combo, but it's not good because the Beast Speaker is in there using the ability. It's good because you've got so many Plains Runners and the Rocktusk Prowler in there making a ton of noise. But the combo is absolutely good enough that you want to have access to it. Another really nice one is the Brew Git out of the Gobapalooza for Gloomspike Gits, and the Ogre Gutlord. That one's another massive damage buff, a little bit better actually than the Git plus the Mega Boss. It's a really nice one, but they have such low mobility that I just couldn't justify putting it on the list. Then as far as the top ranged combo, I've gotten a few reactions to other videos telling me that I've missed the High Sentinel plus the Marksman. Listen, there's nothing wrong with it, and it is pretty good. A lot of the time, you'll do sort of 14 damage, sometimes 18 when you put them together just out of the Marksman, but a lot of the time you'll do 4 or 8. So the average damage from 4 buffed up attacks from the Marksman is 12. So let's add 2 free gold handgunners. Now the average from all 3 shooting twice using the High Sentinel's ability is 17 damage, and it has to go on 1 unit. So if you choose a mobile unit, they can easily move behind terrain, so you have to wait until they're committed, which doesn't mean it's bad, but this is your entire deployment group having to commit to just putting 17 damage on one thing, which is a little bit less flexible than, say, the Living City triple, where that only works on round 1, but with a ranged unit or warband, you can put out to around 30 damage using that triple ability without even really committing to it beyond just one deployment group. And so you can also pop it right away to sort of not have to wait until they've committed, and then if you kill something, you get to put your damage onto something else, which is really nice. Finally, I also just wanted to talk about purely movement abilities. One that's really nice is Sloppity Bilepiper plus 4 Sloppity Bilepiper plus 4 Plaguebearers. There we go. And it also works just as well with 4 Marauders with Flails if you use them as an ally. That's a really nice one as far as putting a bunch of movement, but since it's not putting out damage, it's not really changing how you play your warband. It's not really changing how you do anything except for you just set up your deployment group a certain way. So I didn't want to count it, even though I do love these mobility abilities, and they're absolutely a way to get the most mileage you can out of your warband. For number 8, we've got the Waagh, or the Dark Waagh. This is actually 2 setups that one's for death and one's for destruction that are almost identical in terms of how they work and how you're going to use them. So, the very minor differences, just the Orc War Chanter can buff itself with its AoE damage boost, but the Mortek Guard out of death get a better point-for-point damage boost than anything in the Destruction book does. And then the Death Heroes are a little bit stronger on their own than the War Chanter, but the War Chanter's being a double means it's much easier to add Onslaught in addition to the buff, sending the damage output, straight to the moon. So they're so close, it's really just up to you to decide which is best. Whichever one you have on your own, you're going to love using this ability. So let's talk about some of the units. So each one goes off of their buffer. So in the Ironjaw's case, it's the War Chanter for 230 points. It's not the biggest damage outputter, but It's really hard to kill, especially at that points cost, and it's going to use the Waagh on the triple to add a bunch of movement to its slow buddies, and then the War Chanter's Beat on a double later on, probably in round 2, to boost their damage. Now, for Flesh Eater Courts, usually as an ally, so in this case, as an ally for Ossiarch Bone Reapers, you're going to be looking at the Ghoul King or the Archregent. I've put the Ghoul King in here just because it's a little bit cheaper, which lets you fit one of the mounted Ossiarchs into the warband and still get up to 8 units to use the combo, which gives you nice mobility there. But I absolutely recognize the Archregent is better on its own than the Ghoul King is, so if you don't care about having mounted troops in your Ossiarch list, just use the Archregent. It's got pretty similar situations, so then Bringer of Death is a triple. You're going to add the dice ability to the movement in a 6-inch bubble, and that's going to be awesome on those slow move 3 Mortek guards. And then you have Black Hunger, which gives +1 attack in a 9-inch bubble, which is actually a little bit better than the beat going 6 inches for a triple. But due to FAQ, it no longer buffs itself. So that is a bit of a takeaway there. But either way, you can see the sort of troop units are really quality units that are really just brought down by being so slow. And these abilities are just going to do incredible things for them. So to start with the Ardboys and the Gorechoppa Brute out of Ironjaws, the Ardboy is just a really great fighter, both in terms of damage efficiency and tankiness. And then the War Chanter's Beat is going to add a little bit more than a point of damage on average to each attack, but if it's already fighting when the beat goes off, you can still get both of those attacks being buffed. And then the Gorechoppa Brute is normally actually point for point not the scariest damage piece in the game, but very tanky, very hard to kill, and then it goes from being solid and respectable damage output to very, very scary when the War Chanter's Beat is active. And then also the War Chanter buffs himself, turning himself from, again, a pretty poor damage piece for his points. 5.33 on average is okay, but it's not that special, to something pretty respectable, something that coming off on 2 hits can reliably kill a 12 wound unit, which there's actually a lot of 4 toughness 12 wound units in the game. So you're going to want to sort of have them all in one deployment group. Both of these are set up to be one deployment crew, and then pop these mobility triples in round 1, get them into position, and then pop your either War Chanter's Beat or Black Hunger to really make things go crazy in round 2 and make things really difficult for your opponents. You'll do that as the very first thing you do in the round, and it's going to be really great. So the Mortek Guard, I think I didn't talk them up enough before. They are already an incredibly high damage piece at 9.2 damage efficiency. They're not the hardest to kill for their points, costing 95 each, but the damage output goes from 4.5, which for such a cheap points cost is really excellent, to all the way to 6, which just makes 3 of them all in one place an absolute blender, especially with the Ghoul King helping them out. So overall, both of these are just going to be huge boosts for the warbands that have them, and I would say, while Ironjaws and Ossiarch Bone Reapers aren't the most competitive warbands in the game, they're absolutely best served when using their sort of mobility triple round 1 into AoE buff round 2 combo. Then we've got the High Tide combo. This one's really well known, really famous around Warcry. People love their Idoneth Deepkin in this game, and you could have justified putting this much higher on the list as well. So this is with an Ishlian Prince and 2 Namarti Thralls. The Ishlian Prince is a really solid, sort of mobile, hard to kill leader, sort of flies around the board. Not the greatest damage output for its points, but it's okay, it can still fight, and it's again, really difficult to kill. Then the Namarti Thralls are sort of the exact opposite, where they just go down so quickly, but they have an incredible damage output. 10.8 damage efficiency is, some of the highest stuff in the game. And at move 5 for just, basic troops, that's still really solid. Now, the only thing keeping High Tide from being higher on this list is that the fact that it goes off only in round 3 just makes it very easy to disrupt because you're really looking to pump these Namarti Thralls. So the opponent really gets to try to sort of pick them off. So while the Ishlian Prince is nearly impossible to kill, right, because putting 35 wounds onto a toughness 4, move 10 model whose owner doesn't want it to die, not a lot of warbands can do that. The Thralls, it's much more difficult, and so most competitive Deepkin lists, they really only have 5 to 7 Thralls in the list, and so if your opponent makes killing your weak things their priority, all of a sudden when round 3 comes out, you actually won't have the damage output that you're hoping to. Now that said, it still absolutely deserves its place on this list because the damage boost that you get out of it is huge. The Prince goes from doing 6, which for that high points cost isn't the greatest, to 9.17, which is amazing to a toughness 4 unit, and then Thralls go from doing 4 to 6 2/3. So their damage absolutely explodes, and any opponent who didn't do a great job playing around it in round 2 is going to be really sad really quickly. So the next one for number 6, I like to call Blood and Bites. This is one that I had never heard talked about before I started doing research into the different combos you can do, and I was just really blown away by what you can get done with these two units together. So I'm talking about the Daughters of Cain Hag Queen plus the Saurus Knight Alpha out of Seraphon, and together they come out to 335 points. The Hag Queen is sort of your classic support piece. It's got better combat stats than most support leaders, and move 5 is really nice, but it's still not striking fear into opponents, on her own. Then the Saurus Knight Alpha is a cheap mobile anvil. The durability it has is extremely rare for a unit under 200 points. It's 195, by the way. And the 6-inch mobility means that you can pick your fights with it in the majority of your matchups. There's a lot of durable cav units in the game, and most are terrible due to sort of a wet noodle problem. But most don't have the potential for burst damage that this one has. So Tearing Bite adds really significant damage, although just for one attack. But it's still something where anything within 6 inches, you can move onto it and then just take one attack that does a ton of damage. Then you have the Hag Queen's Double, which is Witch Brew, which adds the value of the dice to the strength for the next attack action. Usually, adding to strength doesn't math out to as much damage as adding an attack does, mostly because GW just overpoints strength and toughness in general, but it's at its best when it's used on specifically a 3-strength model that does a lot of damage on regular hits. So something like the Namarti Thrall, the Hearthguard Berserker, and the Saurus Knight Alpha, those are really the 3 units that fit this description best in the order book. And by the way, for the Fire Slayer, that's one of the ones that won't get mentioned elsewhere in this one. Fire Slayer Auric Rune Smiters actually have the same ability as the Hag Queen. They just cost 25 points more and have 2 points less movement, so it's just not as quality an ally. But if you absolutely love Fire Slayers and are having trouble making them competitive, try bringing in a Saurus Knight Alpha and putting these two together. The ability also, of course, works great with their Hearthguard Berserkers. So getting into the sort of bonus damage here, both abilities being used together leads to an average damage per activation against toughness 4 of 16, and that's just out of one guy. So your Hag Queen, this isn't like some of the ranged ones where you're using your entire deployment group to put together 17 damage. This is putting together 16 damage without even talking about whether your Hag Queen was fighting. and without considering whether your Saurus is getting to attack again. So that's really incredible. There are whole supersize units that cost this much and do less damage when using their own self-buff ability over the course of 2 attacks. So just remember, you can pop this ability from your Hag Queen, then go off and fight something or score objectives, and knowing that your next activation, the Saurus Knight, is going to get pumped up. And then anything within 6 inches, it can move on to, or actually within 7, because you move on, get within an inch, and then put down your huge attack. And so this is sort of 12 bonus damage, right? Because it normally does 4 points of damage on its own. So for your opponent, playing around it is actually going to be kind of hard here, and that's part of why I've scored it so high on this list, despite being a single target buff. So chewing through the wounds on the Saurus Alpha is really hard. The Hag is a little bit more vulnerable at toughness 3, 20 wounds, but compared to some of the other, quote, fragile pieces on this list, she's actually going to take real effort to bring down. If they fail to kill your pieces, your opponent can just try to run away. And part of what makes this so strong is that, once the Hag casts Wishbrew, your Knight can move 7 inches to take something out, right? 6 inches of movement plus an inch of range. So they have to run fast, and they only have 1 activation to do so. And that's what makes this so nice. Just make sure to bank a wild dice on turn 1. A triple plus a double is kind of hard to naturally roll, but it's nearly guaranteed if you have 2 wild dice. So next, I'm looking at the Boom Bully. That's the Ogre Tyrant, and it has a really amazing ability called Bully of the First Degree, where it does damage equal to the dice roll to one of its friends, and then that friend gets to make a bonus move or a bonus attack. So this is really tailor-made to use with the other huge Maw Tribes leaders, because they get the most value out of that free attack. And they don't really care about the damage, right? So the Crusher at 285 points, it's a huge damage piece. It's the Ogre Glutton leader. It's got incredible damage efficiency and also really great tankiness. And it's just an absolute monster if you can get it into combat and then get the bonus attack, or you use the Tyrant's ability to get it into an attack, and then it gets to use both of its attacks later to just absolutely delete something. The Tyrant himself is a really nice, versatile piece. He's costs a ton of points, but your point-for-point output there is actually still really good at 7.8 damage efficiency and 7.9 tankiness. Just really hard to kill, wins all his bites. He's actually got a small ranged attack just in case your opponent is trying to play around him by just running away all the time. And then his range 2 is just really remarkable. You don't see such high damage units very often with range 2. Now, all this does cost a whopping 620 points, but the amount of damage you're getting out of it, right? Crushers have damage per activation 4 of 13 1/3, which is just ridiculous. So you're looking at, if you get the bonus attack and then maybe attack 2 other times, you're looking at 40 damage onto something, which just takes out the most elite units in the game. It's also very hard to disrupt because both of these pieces are just so hard to kill. So your opponent's sort of version of disrupting it is really going to need to be sort of giving these two a wide berth. And part of why I'm putting this so high on the list is that the Ogre Tyrant with his ranged attack can still reach people who are giving him a wide berth. And then this giving you the bonus move makes it really difficult to disrupt it, because even if they rob you of your bonus attack, you still get this bonus move that then puts you right in their face, even if they were trying to keep their distance on you. So while the most competitive builds of Ogre Maw tribes tend to focus around lead belchers, feel free, if you're bored of those, having a Tyrant and Crusher in your list plus a bunch of Gnoblars is absolutely something that will make a really powerful warband. Maybe not quite as degenerate as the double Thunderfist list, but still pretty serious. All right, so now we're getting to the very best tricks in the game. We're in our top 4 here, and this one I call the Cypher Slide. So this is a Thrall Master plus any Mirror Blade, and you can actually do it with a couple more options in the Warband as well, but this one's the nicest combo. So the Thrall Master is a solid damage leader who has move 5 to really zip around the board. He is a little bit easier to take out for his points than most things around the same value, but 205 points, it's not like he just dies to a stiff breeze. Then the Mirror Blade, on the other hand, does, right? It's this incredible damage output piece, which for 115 points does as much damage as units that cost twice what it does. Now, for all that damage, you pay for the fact that it's just really easy to take it out, but that's where the Cypher Slide comes in. So the Thrall Master can afford to be a little bit more aggressive than your Mirror Blade can, and can just sort of get up near combat and then use its teleport ability. So the teleport ability lets you bring something from 12 inches away into range equal to the number of dice. And there's nothing in there saying that you can't, or saying that you have a range restriction on how close it can be to other units. So you can actually just teleport one of these fragile Mirror Blades directly into combat. Now, Mirror Blades have so much damage output, even for 115 points, that they can just one-shot kill a chaff unit, then retreat. Or they can double attack to finish off an elite unit. So yes, this is sort of disruptible since they do get one activation after the slide before they just get blown up with damage. But you can still punish them for trying to do that if you target a unit that's already activated. And so you're going to want to have a warband with a lot of the cheapest unit that's available to Cypher Lords. So 2 boxes certainly makes this best, even though you get both pieces with the original box. But it's going to be really hard for them to blow it up the first time, right? Because you can keep your Mirror Blade really safe, sort of in the back of your position early on. And then your Thrall Master, 20 wounds, again, fairly killable as far as late game, but really hard to take out early on. So you can just fly in, take out a really important piece somewhere early in the game. And then, yes, it's going to be hard for you to do the trick twice, but hopefully you can get so much value out of it right away that that helps you win the game. Also note that the Slann Starmaster can do the same for the order book, but the targets aren't quite as nice there. They're a little bit less points efficient. Just some of the order ground pounding sort of smashy units, they just aren't as points scary as the Mirror Blade for doing this exact trick. Also note that the Thrall Master can teleport Nurglings and Blissbarb Archers as well if you ever have the desire to do something like that. All right, so then we've got our other original Warcry warband trick, and that's going to be Snakes and some pain if you're old like me and you still remember Snakes on a Plane. So a Serpent Caller and a Serpent are only 210 points. And the Serpent Caller is a solid damage output unit in its own right. And not very tanky, though it at least doesn't just get blown up too quickly. But at move 5, it's pretty flexible, and then it can give Snakes a bonus attack on a triple. So then Serpents are the, I think, absolute most efficient damage output unit in the game. For only 65 points, they do an incredible 4 and a sixth damage per attack, or per activation. And they're incredibly flexible because that move 6 means that they can really get around the board and sort of choose their fights. So then with this, yes, it is sort of disruptible in that a single serpent is very easy to kill. But the thing is, serpents are so cheap, you can spam them. So imagine having 3 serpents coming at you in round 1 with a serpent collar behind them. Which one do you kill, right? Because anything you get into attacks with that you don't manage to take out in just one try, the caller can then just activate them for 4 damage right away, and then you're still just getting blown up. So the bonus damage is probably the least of any combo on this list, but the incredible flexibility, the incredible efficiency for that points cost, again, a Serpent Caller plus 3 Serpents is only a third of your list. 1 plus 1 Serpent is barely over a fifth. So that's going to let you just do so much with the rest of your list that is just going to be really frustrating for your opponent, and give you a ton of options. Now, this one is a little bit less notorious sort of around the community because the Serpents only get 1 per box of Splintered Fang. So a Splintered Fang Warband revolving around this combo is an absolute terror, but it does take a lot of work, sort of putting it together, sort of finding other snakes elsewhere if you want to use this. So from 2 combos that kind of slip under the radar to one that so many people who talk about and love Warcry complain about a little bit is the Pestilens Bomb. So we're looking at a Plague Priest plus 3 Plague Monks with staves. And these units are some of the scariest in Warcry. Now, the Plague Priest doesn't quite measure up there. It's not the highest damage output unit, and while it's certainly, not too killable for its points, which are 180, it's not scaring anyone. But it does have that range 2 on its little spear, which is really important for the combo that you'll see later. Then we've got Plague Monks, which are so cheap at 70 points and do an incredible amount of damage with range 2 on their little staves. And they're absolutely one of the most competitive chaff units in Warcry, just because the ability to play around your opponent by dancing around them with your range 2 while still having damage output that, probably outstrips your range 1 opponents, and with movement 6 being able to fly around the board. Not literally, they don't actually fly, but it feels like it with how quickly they move. It just makes them, sort of just on their own, one of the most feared. So all Skaven leaders have the ability to pop lead from the back, which is going to add half the dice roll to all attacks within a 3-inch bubble from themselves. So that's much more than the normal 1 that you get with these abilities, but it's supposedly balanced, right, because it's only a 3-inch radius. Now, okay, but what if the Skaven also had the best 2-inch range unit in the game, possibly, with the Plague Monk, right? And then you're increasing your strike unit, or strike radius, quite a bit, because now every unit in this bomb has range 2. So Plague Monks mean that everything in a 6-inch bubble now is open to attack, as opposed to just a 3-inch. So the difference between this and putting this on range 1 is incredible. And then Plague Monks go from doing 3 per activation against toughness 4 to 5. So that sort of pretty massive, right? 66% damage buff coming out of this ability is much more than I think that the designers probably intended to see. Now, taking out 1 toughness 3 8 wound model to prevent some of this damage isn't too hard, but remember that Plague Monks have that range 2 again and movement 6. So the Skaven player is going to get to dictate, when and where the fights happen. And then they also have access to giant rats in their list, which can just run interference. So all of that makes the Pestilens Bomb this thing where the Skaven player can just rush up the board very quickly with their movement, and then put this incredible no-go zone where any one unit you have in there is just going to get absolutely blown up. And the sort of balancing that Games Workshop does of making it such a small bubble for such a huge attack boost just doesn't work when you're looking at Plague Monks, which is what makes them so powerful and absolutely deserving of the number 2 spot on this list. In fact, they'd easily get the number 1 spot if it weren't for, yes, another Skaven combo. The Packmaster and the Rat Ogre together are probably the scariest 1-2 punch in the game. So a Packmaster, not too scary on its own, right? Sitting at 65 points, it's not the most damage efficient or the most tanky unit, sort of flagging on its own, although it does have that nice movement 6 that all the base Skaven have. What's scary here is Crack the Whip, which is a double, and makes it so a Rat Ogre within 4 inches can make a bonus attack. Now, Rat Ogres are the real terror here, right? So for 225 points, that is incredibly cheap for what they're able to do on the field, right? So Rat Ogres really look a lot more like, monsters that other warbands get for 250 points, 260 points, right? So at damage efficiency 9.2, right, that's makes them one of the better ones in the game, despite very few sort of high points cost models having such an efficient ratio. And then they're not easy to kill either. And movement 5 still makes them very flexible. So we're looking at only 290 points here, so less than 300 to get a bonus attack that on average is going to do more than 10 damage, right? So this sort of looking at what each of them can do on their own and then added together, the damage efficiency here, point for point, is just incredible. It blows every other combo that I've talked about completely out of the water. Now, disrupting it is hard with any of the bonus attack ones, right? What you're looking for is not to start the round in combat with the attack piece. So try not to be fighting a Rat Ogre over the course of 2 rounds, which is hard because they're hard to kill. Or you can't overextend anything into the Rat Ogre's reach, right? Because then it'll get into you, attack you once, and then the Packmaster will follow up and give it a bonus attack. Now, you do have the option of trying to kill this toughness 3 8-wound model, and a lot of ranged warbands, for example, will be able to disrupt this combo that way. A lot of those warbands will struggle against Skaven in general, because Skaven all have this move 6 other than the Rat Ogre, but they'll at least be able to break up the combo, and that at least helps them a little bit. Now, the Skaven player can sort of respond by taking a Master Moulder instead of a Packmaster, which also has access to this Crack the Whip ability. And the Master Moulder is going to be 140 points instead of 65, and it's going to let you have 20 wounds there instead of just 8. So it's going to be much harder to take down and much more consistent with how well it boosts up this Rat Ogre. So I don't know if it's a surprise to anyone that Skaven are taking the top 2 spots, but let's take a look at maybe how you could build a Skaven list that uses both combos, right? Because that's sort of the holy grail, right, of creating the optimal Skaven list. So if anybody's watched a lot of my videos, they probably remember the top 8 heavyweights video that I did, where I ranked the Rat Ogre number 2 overall and talked about how to build just around Rat Ogres. And so there I put down a 2 Rat Ogre list that is absolutely very strong. Very sort of straightforward. We're just beating with these giant ogres and then running interference with giant rats. This one's going to be a slightly more Johnny version of the scariest warband in the game. So we're taking the Pestilens Bomb at 390 points, and then we're going to have the slightly harder to disrupt Master Moulder here to make the Moulder Monster 365 points. So these are going to be our 2 sort of orbital nukes that are going to take up our main 2 deployment zones. But then we still have this flood of filth to just flood the board and enable the combo and make it very difficult for your opponent to disrupt anything, right? Because for 245 points, we can get 7 giant rats in there. So we can, let's say we make the Pestilens Bomb our shield and the Moulder Monster our dagger, right? We can still put 2 giant rats into each of those and still have 3 giant rats left over to put in the hammer, because all of this rounds out perfectly to 1,000 points. Uh, this is only to be used by the most degenerate among you who want to make your opponents as sad as possible, but they also fit better because one of them is a double and one of them is a triple, which fits perfectly. So there you have it, the top combos in Warcry. I got to apologize for making Skaven #1 and #2 there, but you know the numbers behind that Rat Ogre Packmaster combo, they speak for themselves. I mean, for example, that Ogre bonus attack combo that's so amazing with the Tyrant and the Crusher. Uh, the Rat Ogre is putting out almost as much damage when it's being comboed, but manages to do so for half the points cost, less than half the points cost actually, when you put those two together. So the numbers are just so scary on Skaven everywhere around the warband. Even just the way they're kind of able to weasel their way out of some of the restrictions on that lead from the back ability using Plague Monks is really quite remarkable. Um, last, one of my favorite combos in the game, the Cenari Cathalar plus the um, either Lord Aquiller or maybe some of the Evocator Lords for Stormcast. I absolutely love that combo, but I just couldn't bring myself to put it on this list because you really just have no idea how much damage you're going to do every time you use it. But it's still awesome, and with all those Aether Wings, it's absolutely still at least a semi-competitive list. You could totally bring it to a tournament if you wanted to, even if I wasn't able to really find it a place on this list. So that's going to be all, and I had a lot of fun with this one, took a lot of research, but I'm going to be back later with some more tactics videos in the future, hoping to finish my Waagh campaign so that maybe I can finally get back to doing a deep dive, this time on Gloomspite Gitz. So that'll be the future, and until then, may all your rolls be crits.